Picture this. You're standing in a massive crowd, and everyone around you is bowing down to worship a giant golden statue. The music is playing loudly, and thousands of people are on their knees. But you remain standing. You know that bowing down means betraying everything you believe in. What would you do? Would you have the courage to stand alone when everyone else is giving in? Today, we're going to explore one of the most incredible stories of courage and faith ever told. It's the story of three young men who faced the most powerful king in the world and chose to walk into a blazing furnace rather than compromise their beliefs. This isn't just an ancient tale. It's a story that speaks to each of us about what it really means to have unshakable faith. Our story doesn't start with fire and flames. It begins with heartbreak and loss. Many years before the famous furnace incident, the great city of Jerusalem had fallen. The mighty Babylonian Empire, led by King Nebuchadnezzar, had conquered the land. Buildings were destroyed, families were torn apart, and the people of Israel faced one of their darkest hours. But King Nebuchadnezzar wasn't interested in killing everyone. He had a different plan. He ordered his officials to search through the conquered people and find the best and brightest young men. He wanted those from royal families and noble backgrounds. These young men would be taken from their homes and brought to serve in his palace in Babylon. Among those chosen were three friends. Their real names were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These weren't just any ordinary young men. They were devoted followers of the one true God. They had grown up learning about their faith, understanding right from wrong, and knowing that their loyalty belonged to God alone. Can you imagine what this must have felt like? One day you're at home with your family, following your customs and worshiping God freely. The next day, you're being dragged away from everything you know and love. You're forced to travel hundreds of miles to a foreign country where everything is different. The language is different, the food is different, the customs are different, and worst of all, the gods are different. But their greatest challenge wasn't just surviving in this new place. It was keeping their faith alive when everything around them was trying to destroy it. As soon as these three young men arrived in Babylon, something happened that might seem small but was actually very significant. They were given new names. Hananiah became Shadrach, Mishael became Meshach, and Azariah became Abednego. Now, you might think, what's the big deal about changing names? But this wasn't just about convenience or fitting in. This was psychological warfare. Their original Hebrew names had deep meaning. They honored Yahweh, the God of Israel. But their new Babylonian names were connected to the false gods of Babylon. The king's officials were trying to do more than just change what people called them. They were trying to change who they were on the inside. They wanted these young men to forget about their God and start worshiping the Babylonian gods instead. But the name change was just the beginning. These three friends, along with their companion Daniel, were enrolled in a 3-year training program. They would learn the Babylonian language, study Babylonian wisdom, and eat food from the king's table. They were being prepared to serve in the royal court. However, there was a serious problem with this arrangement. The food they were expected to eat had been dedicated to false gods. Right from the start, they faced their first test. Would they compromise their beliefs for comfort and safety, or would they stand firm even if it meant facing danger? The four friends made a bold and risky decision. They refused to eat the king's food. Instead, they asked for permission to eat only vegetables and drink water. This might not sound like a big deal to us today, but in Babylon, refusing the king's food was incredibly dangerous. People had been killed for much smaller acts of disobedience. But something amazing happened. God blessed their decision. After 10 days on their simple diet, they looked healthier and stronger than all the other young men who had been eating the rich food from the king's table. This was just the beginning of God showing his power in their lives. Even though they had been taken far from their homeland, they had not been taken away from their God. Their faith remained strong, and soon that faith would be tested in a way that would shake the entire Babylonian Empire. Years passed, and King Nebuchadnezzar's power grew beyond imagination. His empire stretched across many nations, and his influence reached every corner of the known world. But as his power increased, so did his pride. The king wanted more than just political control over his people. He wanted their worship. One day, Nebuchadnezzar came up with a plan that would demonstrate his absolute authority. He ordered his workers to build a massive golden statue. This wasn't just any statue. It was 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. To help you picture this, imagine a building that's 9 stories high, completely covered in gold. It was absolutely enormous and could be seen from miles away. The king had this golden giant placed on the plain of Dura, a flat, open area where everyone could see it clearly. But building the statue was only the first part of his plan. Next came his royal decree, and this decree would change everything. Nebuchadnezzar announced that whenever the royal music played, every single person in the kingdom must bow down and worship the golden statue. This wasn't a request or a suggestion. It was a direct command from the most powerful man in the world. And just to make sure everyone understood how serious he was, the king added a terrifying consequence for anyone who refused. They would be thrown alive into a blazing furnace. The message was clear: bow down or burn. The day arrived when the king's command would be put to the test. A huge crowd gathered on the plain of Dura. People came from every part of the kingdom. Government officials, military leaders, ordinary citizens, and foreigners like our 3 friends all stood together in the massive crowd. Then the music began. The sound of harps, lyres, flutes, and every kind of musical instrument filled the air. It was the signal everyone had been waiting for and dreading. As soon as those first musical notes rang out, something incredible happened. Thousands upon thousands of people dropped to their knees. Like a giant wave sweeping across the plain, everyone bowed down with their faces to the ground. Everyone, that is, except for 3 men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego remained standing. While everyone around them submitted to the king's command, these 3 friends stood tall and refused to bow. They didn't hesitate. They didn't look around nervously to see what others were doing. They didn't try to compromise by bowing just a little bit. They stood firm, their decision already made in their hearts. This wasn't just about refusing to bow to a statue. This was about loyalty to the one true God. They remembered the commandment that God had given to their ancestors: "You shall have no other gods before me." No matter what it cost them, they would obey God rather than man. But their courageous stand didn't go unnoticed. Some of the Babylonian officials, probably jealous of the favor these 3 Jewish men had found in the kingdom, quickly reported them to the king. "O king," they said, "didn't you command that everyone must bow to your golden image? Well, these 3 Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have refused to obey you. They won't serve your gods or worship your statue." When King Nebuchadnezzar heard this report, he flew into a rage. How could anyone dare to defy his direct command? How could these 3 men from a conquered nation have the audacity to stand against his authority? His pride was wounded and his anger burned hot. He immediately ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. They would now stand face to face with the most powerful ruler in the world, and their answer would determine whether they lived or died. As they stood before the furious king, Nebuchadnezzar gave them what he probably thought was a generous offer. "Is it true that you refuse to worship my golden statue?" he demanded. "I'll tell you what, I'm going to give you one more chance. When the music plays again, bow down and worship my image, and all will be forgiven. But if you refuse, you will immediately be thrown into the blazing furnace. And then we'll see what God will be able to rescue you from my power." The threat was very real. The furnace wasn't just scary words meant to frighten people. It was an actual execution chamber where the king burned alive anyone who dared to oppose him. The heat from this furnace was so intense that it could kill a person just from being near it. Most people, when faced with such a terrifying choice, would probably try to find some middle ground. Maybe they would bow down just to save their lives while keeping their real faith hidden in their hearts. Maybe they would try to negotiate or ask for more time to think about it. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't do any of those things. Without hesitation, they gave an answer that stunned everyone in the royal court. "O king," they said calmly, "we don't need to defend ourselves to you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, our God is able to deliver us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know that we will never serve your gods or worship the golden statue you have set up." Think about the incredible courage behind these words. They weren't just declaring faith in God's power to save them. They were declaring faith in God's will, whether He chose to save them or not. They were saying, even if God allows us to die in that furnace, we still won't compromise our beliefs. This was the kind of faith that shook the foundations of empires. It was faith that said, we trust God completely, no matter what happens to us. Nebuchadnezzar's face turned red with fury. How dare they challenge him in front of his entire court? His pride simply could not tolerate this defiance. In his rage, he ordered that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. The very air around the furnace became unbearable, with waves of heat that made the ground shimmer and distort. Then he commanded his strongest soldiers to tie up the 3 men and throw them into the fire. There would be no escape, no negotiations, and no last-minute pleas for mercy. They would burn as an example to anyone else who might think of defying the king. As the soldiers led Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego toward the furnace, the heat became so intense that it actually killed the soldiers who were carrying them. But even as they fell into the flames, the 3 friends didn't scream in terror. They didn't beg for mercy or fight against their captors. They fell into the fire completely trusting in the God they served. The crowd that had gathered to watch gasped in horror, expecting to hear the sounds of burning flesh and cries of agony. Everyone thought this would be the end of the 3 brave men who had dared to defy the king. But what happened next was something that no one, not even the king himself, could have possibly imagined. The furnace roared with unimaginable heat. Flames shot up like a living beast, threatening to consume everything in their path. King Nebuchadnezzar watched with satisfaction, certain that this public execution would serve as a warning to anyone else who might think of rebelling against his authority. But as the smoke rose from the furnace, something impossible began to unfold before everyone's eyes. Nebuchadnezzar squinted his eyes, staring intently into the fire. He had been watching carefully, expecting to see the 3 men burn to ashes within moments. But instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold with shock and amazement. "Wait a minute," the king said, his voice trembling with confusion. "Didn't we throw 3 men bound into the fire?" His advisors nodded nervously, their own eyes glued to the fiery furnace. "But look!" Nebuchadnezzar cried out, pointing toward the flames with a shaking hand. "I see 4 men walking around freely in the fire, and they're completely unharmed. And the 4th one looks like a son of the gods." It wasn't just that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were alive. They were walking around in the fire as if they were strolling through a beautiful garden. The flames that should have killed them instantly weren't even touching them. There was no smoke rising from their bodies, no damage to their clothing, and most incredibly of all, there was no sign of pain or distress on their faces. They were completely and totally protected. But who was the 4th figure walking with them? King Nebuchadnezzar, who had seen many things in his years of power, recognized that this was no ordinary intervention. He had heard stories of gods and supernatural beings, but this was real. This was happening right before his eyes. Some believe it was an angel sent by God. Others believe it might have been Jesus himself appearing in the Old Testament times. Whatever the case, the king had no doubt that this was something far beyond any earthly power he had ever known. Nebuchadnezzar didn't waste any time. Overcome with awe and fear, he rushed to the mouth of the blazing furnace and shouted at the top of his voice, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here." As the 3 friends emerged from the fire, the crowd gasped in absolute amazement. Not only were they alive, but they were completely untouched by the flames. Their clothes weren't singed. Their hair wasn't scorched. There wasn't even the faintest smell of smoke clinging to them. It was as if the fire had never touched them at all. Nebuchadnezzar, the same king who had ordered their execution just moments before, now had no choice but to acknowledge the incredible divine power that had saved them. In front of his entire court and all the people gathered there, he made a declaration that would echo through history. "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego," the king announced loudly. "He has sent his angel and rescued his servants. These men trusted in him and defied my command, and they were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God." But Nebuchadnezzar didn't stop there. He went even further, making a decree that protected not just these 3 men, but anyone who worshipped their God. Therefore, I order that people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble. For no other God can save in this way. The fire that was meant to destroy them had instead become the very place where God's awesome power was revealed to an entire empire. As the excitement began to die down and people processed what they had just witnessed, King Nebuchadnezzar turned to face Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But instead of punishing them for their earlier defiance, he had something entirely different in mind. "You 3 have shown extraordinary courage," the king told them, his voice filled with admiration and respect. "Because of your unwavering faith and the miracle we have all witnessed today, I am promoting you to even higher positions in my kingdom." Think about this amazing turn of events. These 3 men had started the day facing death for their refusal to compromise their beliefs. They had been willing to die rather than worship false gods. And now, just hours later, they were being honored and promoted by the very king who had tried to kill them. Their trial had been intense and public, but it had also been the exact thing that brought about their elevation. Their faith had been tested by fire, and through that fire, they had been made stronger. They now stood before the king, promoted, honored, and ready to continue serving God with even more influence and authority than before. The lesson here is profound. Sometimes God doesn't just deliver us from our trials. Sometimes He uses those very trials to refine us, to strengthen us, and to bring us into greater opportunities than we ever imagined possible. As this incredible story comes to an end, we can't help but ask ourselves what it means for our lives today. After all, most of us will never face a literal fiery furnace. But all of us will face moments when we have to choose between doing what's easy and doing what's right. We'll all encounter situations where standing up for our beliefs might cost us something. The story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego teaches us that sometimes God doesn't remove us from difficult situations. Sometimes He walks through them with us. Just like that mysterious 4th figure who appeared in the fire with them, God promises to be with us in our trials. Their story also teaches us about the power of standing firm in our convictions. When everyone around them was bowing down, they chose to stand up. When compromise would have been easier, they chose courage. When saving their lives meant betraying their God, they chose faithfulness instead. The fires we face in our lives might not be literal flames, but they're just as real. Maybe you're facing pressure at work to do something dishonest. Maybe friends are trying to get you to compromise your values. Maybe you're dealing with financial struggles and you're tempted to take shortcuts that you know are wrong. Maybe you're facing illness, relationship problems, or other challenges that test your faith. The message from this ancient story is clear: you are never alone in your fire. The same God who protected Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is with you today. He sees your struggles, He knows your pain, and He's walking through every trial with you. Sometimes the fire you fear the most is the very thing that will bring you to your greatest victory. Sometimes what looks like defeat is actually the setup for your promotion. Sometimes standing firm when everyone else is compromising is exactly what opens the door to your next level of blessing. The story of these 3 Hebrew boys continues to inspire people thousands of years later because it touches something deep in the human spirit. It reminds us that there are some things worth standing for, no matter what it costs. It shows us that real faith isn't just believing when things are easy, but trusting God even when everything looks hopeless. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego didn't know they would be rescued when they chose to walk into that furnace. They made their decision to stay faithful whether God saved them or not. That's the kind of faith that moves mountains and changes kingdoms. So the question for each of us is this: what are you willing to stand for? What beliefs are so important to you that you would rather face the fire than compromise? And when your moment of testing comes, will you have the courage to stand tall while everyone else is bowing down? Remember, you don't have to face your fires alone. The God who walked with them in the flames is the same God who walks with you today. Trust Him, stand firm in your faith, and watch as He turns your trials into triumphs. If this story has inspired you and reminded you of God's faithfulness, I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Share how this message has encouraged you, or tell us about a time when God walked with you through your own fiery trial. And if you found value in this retelling of one of the Bible's most powerful stories, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we share these life-changing biblical truths. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that they're never alone in their struggles. Until next time, remember that no matter what fire you're facing, God is with you in it, and your greatest victories often come right after your most difficult trials.